So let's just think about this. You were still a PC at Cannon Row at the time?
No, I was on the crime squad, yes, as a PC.
Crime squad at this time, but which station were you working out of?
Rochester Row.
Right. And so your function at the time was to presumably go through a batch of photographs which had been seized by other officers.
Well, my recollection is we didn't actually go through the batch. We were actually handed photographs and say, go and identify who these boys are or where these photographs may have been taken. We weren't privy to actually physically deciding which ones we were going to.
No. But presumably it was more than just you doing this task.
Yes, of course.
And therefore, presumably you, Mr. Groves, were handed a certain amount of photographs and your colleagues,
Yes.
however many
Yes.
other individuals.
They were part of actions that we
That's what I meant by a batch. You were
Yes.
handed a number of photographs and asked to go through them, and you were asked to go through them with a view to identifying victims, the boys who
and
were
venues.
involved in them, the locations in which these indecent incidents had taken place,
Correct.
as well as presumably potential offenders.
Yes.
Yeah. And without going into any graphic detail, the nature of the photographs were what?
They were photographs of boys in compromising positions.
Yeah. With adults,
Yes.
adult men.
Yes.
And when we look, and if you want to look with me, you can, at a statement you made on the 4th of August 2015, the panel will find this statement behind their third tab.
Yeah.
This is the typewritten version. The typewritten version is actually dated the 4th of April 2015. It should be August.
That is correct.
You've got the handwritten version there. We don't need to look at that,
Yes.
but it's the 4th of August.
Yes.
Of 2015, and if you look to the third paragraph, in terms of dating this tasking that you had, you estimated then in 2015 it was between 1983 and 1985,
Correct.
and you were working on that inquiry for around 6 months.
To the best of my recollection, that is correct.
And you went through in your inquiry statement, so if we go back please to the second tab, where you, the first tab, where it's in the bundle for the chair and the panel, you went through paragraph 2 on the second page, what you did and the people you remember working with, including at the end of paragraph 2, a Detective Constable Phil Marshall.
That is correct.
And if we want to look at some other names that you remembered, if we go back please to the typewritten version of the 4th of August 2015 statement, you mention him on the first page in the fifth paragraph.
Yes.
DC Marshall, remember him as Phil.
Yeah.
You describe him. You also remembered in the next paragraph somebody called Dave Lloyd, another senior detective who you refer to as Grandad, presumably because of his seniority.
Yes.
And also a senior detective by the name of Alan Findell.
Correct.
Now the photographs which you and your colleagues had been asked to examine, they had been seized at an address in Ealing by other officers on the Operation Circus
That is correct.
operation. Now, the reason you're here, Mr. Groves, is because you have a recollection about a briefing that was given to officers when you were a police constable about what should happen in the event that prominent members of society should be encountered during the course of your tasking, presumably. And I want to ask you, please, a little about that. If we go to your statement, if we have it still open, the 2015 statement, and we go to the second page, we can see what you said in 2015 at the top. At some point during the investigation, we were briefed by a senior officer. The salient point from the briefing was that if we identified any prominent members of society, and you say, I took this to mean MPs, royalty, or other distinguished individuals, the inquiry was to cease. I can't recall who gave the briefing, where it took place, or who else was present. At the time, I thought the decision was strange, but as a junior PC, I went with it at the time. Throughout my time on the inquiry, I wasn't aware of any prominent people being identified. Now, first of all, do you remember now where this briefing took place?
No, I couldn't be specific. I knew it would happen during the realms of being on that inquiry.
Presumably in a police station?
More than likely, but not necessarily, because sometimes if I think long and hard about it, a lot of times those investigations would have taken place somewhere away from the actual police stations.
So it was away from the police station?
More than likely, yes.
Why do you say that?
Because that is my vague recollection that it wouldn't physically have been at a police station. It would have probably been at a HQ or something like that.
All right, but a police premises?
Police premises, yes.
Is what you have in mind?
Yes.
And am I right in thinking that over all the years you've not been able to put a name to the officer who gave the briefing?
No, as you can appreciate, this happened some 30 odd years ago.
What about his seniority?
No.
I assume it was a male officer.
More than likely during that time.
What sort of seniority?
It could very well have been a sergeant or above. I genuinely can't remember. It would be wrong for me to say it was a sergeant or it was an inspector. I cannot recall.
Now, let's have a look at what you said in your, I call it the inquiry statement. It has an MPS reference, but it's your 2019 statement on pages 2 and 3, paragraph 4. Have you got that, Mr. Groves?
Yes.
I can remember being briefed by a supervisor or manager in relation to a confidential investigation dealing with allegations of indecency involving young boys. This could have been a sergeant, but I can't remember any specific briefings or how many I attended. I cannot remember whether the briefings were held daily or weekly. I can't recall how long I was on the operation for. Is this the briefing you're talking about, or is this just in general terms?
Well, in general terms, it's highly unlikely that there would have been that many briefings that I would have attended.
Yeah.
The chances are a lot of the information would have been fed back to us by whoever was supervising us. But I was certainly at a briefing at some point. Mm. And this is the bit that I shall take my time and try and explain as best I can. I have been grappling with this for many years. And I can remember, although it may not have been said explicitly, it will stop. There was certainly an inference that if we had identified anyone of prominence, that could be a possibility.
Let's just look at paragraph 5. I can, however, remember someone saying that the operation would cease if prominent people were encountered. I can't remember who said this or when exactly during the operation this was said. And then you deal with what it was that triggered your recollection.
Yes.
About it. Can I ask you this? What was it about what was said to you, or what you inferred from what was said to you that prominent people meant MPs, royalty, or other distinguished individuals?
My recollection was there had been a discussion after that briefing, and the view from others that I had spoken to was that they were referring to MPs or persons of note, for a better word.
Right. Did it include celebrities?
There's a possible, but I can't say specifically.
When you say there was a discussion after the briefing, do you mean literally after the briefing ended or at some other point in time?
Some other point in time, yes.
Amongst what? Officers who attended the briefing or other officers?
People who were at the briefing and others who possibly were not at the briefing at the time. But sorry for interrupting you.
No,
but as I'm trying to explain, it is something that for years, at the time, I thought it would, even though it was back in the day, and some people may have said back in the 80s, things like that may have been said or done. I thought it was still very strange, even then back in the 80s, for such a comment to have been made.
And when the comment was made, Mr. Groves, did you make your views plain that you felt it was strange?
No, not that's. No, I certainly didn't. No,
Because
I was junior in service, and I don't want to add other things to it, but I didn't think it was my place. Being a black officer, I was not going to raise my head above the parapet.
So was it a question, if you don't mind me asking, of your inexperience and your lower ranking that made you not report it to
Yes.
anyone, or was there the racial...
No, it was more my rank at the time. I'm just saying, at that time, I would have been one of very few black officers in the Met at that point.
Yeah.
And if anybody can remember back to the 1980s, it was a difficult time.
Yeah.
And at that junior in service, I didn't have the confidence at that point to say something. If it was said years later, I most certainly would have.
Yeah. Do you think, in general terms, there was a culture of deference among junior police ranks towards those in seniority in the 1980s?
Very much so.
Did that culture of deference, so I'm not talking about deference to people in prominent positions, I'm
yes.
talking about deference within police ranks.
Yes,
Did that deference continue to exist over the years that you were in the force up to the time of your retirement, or did it dissipate? Do you
No,
think?
it dissipated. But in the early days, in the early 80s, you would salute senior officers. They'd look at your shoes and they'd criticise you, and you knew exactly where they were coming from. But as the years went on, it was far less. It became less of a disciplined service, for a better word.
So you didn't question. You didn't question what you had been told in the course of this briefing?
No. But as I said before, I felt that was not right.
What about your colleagues of similar rank to you? Did you discuss with your colleagues and friends in the force and those who'd been at the briefing that you didn't think that this was right?
I most certainly did, but to be perfectly candid with you, it wasn't something that became the focus of my attention or anybody else on the team. I certainly commented on it to other officers, but it wasn't something that we kept going back to. We just got on with the job. I was a young constable who found myself on a very sensitive investigation at a very early stage of my career, and I just got on with the job that I was asked to do.
At this briefing, Mr. Groves, appreciated as I'm sure we all do now, it's a long time ago. How many officers were there?
I can't remember how many would have been there.
Give us a, for instance.
If you push me, 10, 15 officers.
And all junior ranks or some senior ranks?
The likelihood there would have been of varying ranks.
Yeah. And did anybody raise an objection or a query to the officer giving this briefing? Well, why on earth should we cease this operation, which we're all working very hard on, if we come across a person of public prominence?
As I said earlier, from my recollection, it wasn't a question that the person said, if this happens, if we find anything about anybody of an MP, for instance, that this will stop. No, it wasn't as straightforward as that. It was a sort of an implied suggestion that that could be a possibility.
Well, of course, we weren't there and you were.
A sort of an implied suggestion that that could be a possibility.
Well, of course, we weren't there and you were.
Yes.
But presumably, whoever was giving the briefing had to utter the words to make it plain to the rank and file who were on the operation that if they were to encounter MPs, royalty, other distinguished individuals during the course of this operation, that the operation would cease or that the investigation into those individuals would cease. What was it?
The investigation would cease.
Into that individual.
Yes.
So whichever way it was couched during the briefing, during the course of the briefing, you in particular came away from that briefing in no uncertain terms realising that if going through the photographs you were to come across somebody you recognised as an MP or a peer or a member of the royal household, for example, that no investigation would continue into that individual.
That was a likely outcome.
Well, explain this, Mr. Groves. Let's say that had exactly happened. Let's say that you were examining a particular batch of photographs and you came across a photograph of a well-known MP in the 1980s. What would you have done about it?
I'd have given it to the sergeant, and whatever inquiries were done, I'd have handed it to them, and that would have been it.
Yeah.
I was not in a position of influence or power to make any decision around what happened next. And can I also add that, with the greatest respect, in the 80s, you did what you were told to do. Yeah. As you mentioned about the nature of the culture at that point. You're not going to stand there in that meeting and argue with a senior officer what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. That just would not happen. This is not 2015, 16 or 17. This was 1983.
3 months pass, having given that photograph to your sergeant, and nothing happens, and you speak to your sergeant in the police station canteen and say, Sarge, what happened, by the way, do you remember that photograph I gave you with that well-known MP doing unspeakable things to that rent boy? And he says, well, I couldn't take it any further because I was told from up high not to investigate that individual.
I think you've got it wrong, Mr. Ortman. That would not have happened because we were attached or seconded to that team. Those officers would have been from possibly some other part of the West End Central. I would have gone back to Rochester Row and I would have had no contact with that sergeant or anyone in the future. That's just the way it was. The scenario you paint would have been great, but that's not the reality.
Well, perhaps you've taken it a bit literally. But what if let's just imagine, Mr. Groves, that looking at these photographs, you've come across a photograph of an MP, and the photograph's been passed up for investigatory purposes, and you discover that nothing's happened.
I wouldn't have known what had happened, to be perfectly honest with you.
Would you not ask?
No, because we were just there to carry on and do a particular task, and once we had completed our actions, we would have written it up. For instance, there would have been occasions where we had an action to go to Borough-in-Furness or to Loughborough University, which are two particular areas I remember us going to.
Because of what the locations in the photographs?
Yes, because of the photographs and other documentation which supported some of those photographs. So we'd have gone to Loughborough University, we went to one of the dormitories, and we identified a particular room based on the wallpaper. We would have completed our action, handed it to the desk sergeant who would have been in charge, and that would have been it. We would have no influence or decision-making about what happened next. We wouldn't ask any questions because as far as we were concerned, we've done our bit, we've handed it over, and that it is.
And as far as you're concerned, certainly from what you viewed among the photographs, no people of public prominence were identified.
No.
What about by your colleagues?
I have no information or recollection of anything like that happening. if it did, and I was aware of it, I would have remembered it and